Alrighty. Shalom everyone, and welcome to the second part of this lecture on Ananda Marga's history and where it is now and the lessons we can learn from it. Hope everyone is doing well and enjoying the feast, and enjoyed the movie last night. I know Kyosha did. Thanks God, and we did here. So, that's good. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's all close our eyes for a moment and center ourselves. Let's become one in this room, despite that we're in different places. And let us learn to the utmost what is the truth. Thanks God. Shalom. So does everyone remember where we left off last time? Right at the end of Baba's life, he had just left his body. Does anyone have any questions? I'll just ask real quick up to this point, or do they want me to refresh them at all? What happened? Just the Ananda Marga organization at this point is all over the world. It is in many different countries and places, and it's not big compared to Islam, say, but it is pretty big, considering how recently it came, and it sort of exploded across the map quite quickly. So it's in a lot of different places, but as Maitreya had noticed, even in the 1970s, there was a lot of disconnects, a lot of resentment between different people and things. People didn't seem to follow what Baba taught in a lot of ways. And they were also known as a terrorist organization in many places. There was a lot of fanaticism, and Baba was put in prison. He was poisoned. His wife left. And so they were having some problems too, a lot of conflicts and deaths. And but they were all over the world. And at this point in the organization, Baba, which was the centerpiece, the head, dies. And we start at this point. So, this is in 1990. Now, after Baba dies, those close to him have to try to figure out what they should do next. And the problem is that Baba left no explicit instructions on what would happen or what should happen after he dies. He didn't appoint who would be the leader afterwards. He didn't really say, you know, if anything would change in the organization, if anything would stay the same. Actually, give me one moment. I want to read something. Here we go. Yes, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is a personal, Baba's personal assistant. At that time, he gave an interview talking about what it was like right before Baba died, and I'm going to read a little bit of this because it's interesting. It says, since August, he was clearly in a hurry. He spent very little time alone. Instead, he was calling frequent group and individual meetings. Over the last weeks, many times in the wee hours of the morning, say at 3 or at 4, he would wake me and instruct me to call certain whole-timers. The first time it happened, I told him it was 3 o'clock, they would surely be sleeping. He became angry and said that if those whole-timers were not here within 10 minutes, then he would not have a chance to give them the program that was in his mind. Of course, I got them. We all became exhausted by his speed, but instead of slowing down, he accelerated. Let's see. On the last day, October 21, let's see, trying to see what parts are important. He was working with the same tremendous speed that he had shown during these last months. Though he had composed the final 2 of his songs late the previous night, he rose at 3 o'clock as usual to perform his spiritual practices. Later he reviewed the work of various departments and gave instructions while shaving. Even this was the usual part of his hectic schedule. He always told us you should not only be prepared to die while working, you should also work while dying. These words he clearly practiced. Shortly before 2 in the afternoon he said to me, I want to think. As I shut the door, I thought to myself that he had never said such a thing before. After a few minutes he called me. I believe it was during those minutes that he carefully reviewed all his plans and confirmed that nothing remained to be done. He asked me to send one of the new avatudas and to see him, etc., etc. After that, he told me, I want to rest now. Those words also he had never spoken before. About 5 minutes later, he rang the call bell. When I came, he pointed to his chest and said, "Heart." I ran to bring the doctors. They came quickly and began massaging Baba. But when they felt for his pulse, their faces turned ashen. His life force was gone. And the point I want to make with that is, well, first it's interesting, but also the point I want to make with that is that it's not like he was bedridden or unable to do work. He was extremely active, even at the very last moments of his life, and was actually working frantically, it seems, to make sure that everything was done. And yet, despite all that, he did not leave any provisions as to what happened after his death. And I find that to be a very telling detail, which I'm going to talk about later when we talk about the lessons we can learn from this. But it certainly seems strange. If we accept that Ananda Marga was supposed to be eternal, which of course we do not, and then it becomes less strange. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Baba leaves no explicit instructions, so all of his senior Margis have to try to figure out what to do instead. So they go to his rules and regulations, which I talked about in the last lecture, Charya Charya, to try to figure out what they should do. And the problem is that while Charya Charya is very long and pretty thorough in some ways, it's not complete. And so some things were not completely understood, even looking through that, and even some things in the later sections that Baba added later in his life actually seem to contradict things in earlier sections, and the whole process is just not made completely clear. And I'm going to read this little section from this person wrote in an email a brief history of what had happened since 1990, and this section is from that email. It's probably, like, the person who wrote this email is a little biased, but I think these facts are accurate. So it says, Charya Charya Part 1. The title of this small book means code. It is the social scripture given by Baba, and it is a binding document for all Margis, yet there are different editions and different versions. This happened because after it was first published in 1956, Baba dictated several additions to it in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. In 1995, 3 senior workers were appointed to study the various editions in Bengali, French, and Hindi in order to finalize one authoritative version. But some questions still remain. For example, in some versions it says that the Parota board, and the Parota board is kind of like the elder body of Ananda Marga. It's not exactly. It has more of an active role. But it's kind of like a combination between the elder body and maybe the judicial or legislative. But anyway, the point is that it's like the head of the organization. In some versions it says that the Parota board should be composed of 5 members, and in others 3 members. Another problem is that there are also different interpretations of these different versions. One example of this is that Charya Charya states that the Parotas will elect the PP, and the PP I believe stands for Parota something. Parota like Pramulga or something. He's basically the eldest. You could say he's the eldest of the elder body. So that Charya Charya states that the Parotas will elect the PP. But does that mean the election requires an absolute majority, or a simple majority, or should it be done by consensus? This has never been clarified. And these things maybe seem small taken individually, but when your guru suddenly leaves and doesn't tell you exactly what you should be doing, all of a sudden these issues become very big because you're very worried that you're not doing it right. And also maybe some people will have an idea of doing it one way, and other people will have an idea of doing it another way, and so disagreements begin. So in any case, they finally select an organizational leader, a PP, to replace Baba, because Baba, of course, was the PP essentially during his life. And so that's done. So, the organization begins moving on as it was before, but tensions were already beginning to rise, even in terms of how they select that organizational leader. Probably not everyone agreed with who it was, or the way that it was done. And disagreements beginning, natural human instinct to want their own way and such. And at the next period of elections in 1994, I don't exactly know the details, but I know that all of a sudden a lot of the people that were currently leading were voted out and replaced. And of course, a lot of people didn't like that. I mean, that's natural. If someone's been your leader for a long time and suddenly is replaced by somebody you don't know for seemingly no reason, or maybe you don't understand the reason, it creates a reaction. And not to mention that, like, a lot of people were starting to feel like these things were not being done for the good of the organization, but for some sort of political gain or power trips. And as I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, but anyway, it became more and more clear that a lot of the tension stemmed between the Hindi Margis and the Bengali Margis. And I guess Hindi and Bengali are two ethnic groups, I guess you could say, in India. And I'm not even sure if you can call them Hindi, but Bengali definitely is an ethnic group. And apparently, there's a long-standing rivalry between Bengali and others. And it's got deep roots in Indian culture. They may have actually been separate like states for a while. I don't know the history that well, but in any case, there has always been a rivalry between them, and like racism on both sides, persecution on both sides, etc. And of course, the disciples of Baba brought this with them when they came to Ananda Marga. It doesn't just disappear. And of course, they knew that Baba wouldn't tolerate this, so I'm sure that it was kept pretty well under control while Baba was around. I'm sure they suppressed these feelings or tried to overcome them, but apparently, after Baba left, that changed, and they all started bubbling to the surface again. And one of the most specific to Ananda Marga problems in terms of this is that I don't know if it's because Baba lived most of his time, or like because the place where Baba worked or lived was in Bengali, but I don't know exactly the reason, but I do know that it's been cited many times in the emails I read that like every single high-ranking position during Baba's life, except for like 2, I think, was held by a Bengali. And apparently that matters a lot to some people. And a lot of the Hindis or the non-Bengalis apparently resented this very much. They felt like either belittled or, you know, just racist or something like that. Or of course they couldn't mention anything to Baba, but afterwards it sounded like this resentment started coming out in their actions. And I mean, we know human nature. I'm sure that some of the Bengalis probably lorded this over the others. The fact that they had so many Bengalis in the high-ranking positions. I'm sure that there was some guilt on both sides. But the whole point being is that this was true, and this resentment and conflict did exist, and it became more and more exposed and became more and more of a political factor within the organization. And it eventually leads to, well, we'll talk about it in a bit. Really quickly, as a side note here, everyone remembers Satish, right? Satish was the first person that Maitreya met in Ananda Marga. And in our research, we actually found out what he's been doing since then. Just before, in the year of Baba's death, Baba actually appointed him to be the leader of something called Ananda Marga Gurukula, which was his ashram-style educational system. He had started something where he wanted to move back to a more traditional ashram Indian-style education, and he appointed Satish to be the leader of that organization. So that's what he did until around 1994, and in 1994, at the next period of elections, Satish, or Dada Shambhu Shivananda, as he's called in the Ananda Marga Sanskrit name, became one of the Parota board. So he became one of the elders, you could say, of Ananda Marga for the next 5 years, I think, like that. So that's interesting. That's what happened to Satish. And now I believe he's working in Europe somewhere. So he's still around, and just interesting that we found him after all these years. But okay, so back to the history. So after this period of elections, when Satish was elected and the leaders were replaced and stuff, you know, more small tensions became, you know, started, etc. Things became more deep. So there was like one time when they decided to transfer a whole bunch of Margis from one place to another, like different leaders all around, and they said that they had consulted everyone, but they hadn't, I guess, and so it caused a lot of conflict and problems, and people said it was political and this and that. The whole point being, again, that like things were getting in the way of working for God and working for the organization. That there was politics in play, there was ego, power trips, racial sentiment, etc. And these were causing problems within the organization. And I found one person told me that in 2000, some Bengalis were actually beaten up by some Hindis at a Margi gathering. I can't verify that because it was only from one person, but they did say that. And then all of this eventually escalated, and in 2002, in protest, the Margis in the Bengali central area, which is Kolkata, they had like an organizational part, a part of their organization there, I think to administrate the Bengali part of India. In Kolkata, in protest, they started holding their own like gatherings and sessions and like lectures, for example, separate from the central administration in protest. And I don't think they expected the response, but the response was that the central administration expelled one of the senior Margis in the Bengali area, kind of like excommunicated him, you could say. Saying that like he's the one that did this, he's the one that created this idea, therefore he has like disrupted Ananda Marga, and we are expelling him. And this is the first example of expelling I can find throughout the entire history of Ananda Marga, and that might not mean that there wasn't. Maybe Baba did do some expelling that nobody talked about, but I certainly couldn't find it in history. This is the first time I found some place that people talked about expelling. And so that created a huge reaction, as you can probably imagine. And also in that same year, it seems like I found some sources that said that more conflict and violence seemed to have taken place between the groups. So the split was widening. And finally, in 2003, the split becomes official. This is when most of the Margis say that this is the year of the split, because finally the Kolkata Margis, the Bengali Margis, they not only do they hold their own programs, but they elect their own governing body and claim that they are truly the legitimate Ananda Marga, not the others, that the others have become, too ungodly and too disruptive and too violent. And they sent out a bunch of emails and a bunch of letters to all the Margis all over the world saying that the administration had changed. It was no longer led by the Ranchi administration, which is what most people call the Hindi-led organization, because I think the administration is based in a place called Ranchi. Although Ananda Nagar, if you remember, that's where Baba wanted the organization to be led. I think that's also part of the Ranchi administration at this point. It's run by Ranchi, but they call them Ranchi. I'm not exactly. I think that's why. In any case, so the Kolkata Margis elected their own governing body and claimed they were truly the legitimate AM, Ananda Marga, and that everyone should start taking orders from them instead. And when I say governing body, I mean kind of like the legislative board. They didn't actually elect their own elder body or their own Peruta board or their own eldest. They don't have one of those yet. They are in legal litigation saying that the one that Ranchi has is not legitimate, but they haven't elected their own yet. I guess they don't want to break away from Baba that extreme, although, I mean, it's kind of a moot point. But in any case, so that's what they did. And Ranchi, or the Hindi administration, responded by expelling the entire new governing body. And the split is complete at this point. there is no reconciliation between these two. They are two different organizations. And also in 2003, in that same year, they had a collective lecture event or kind of get together, and I think it's called DMC, Dharma Mahachakra, or something like that. It's like getting together for satsang and lectures and programs, etc. And at one of those, at Ananda Nagar, the details are blurry, but apparently a lot of violence occurred between the Hindis and the Bengali Margis, leading to the death of a Margi. Somebody actually died in this case. And charges were filed against the other organization, and I don't know where that's gone, but again, it was legal. Like, the police was involved. I think that the source that I read said that this was the first time in many years that the police had become involved in internal Margi affairs. And this continues, and the split widens, etc. And in 2005, a third organization is formed. And I don't exactly know the details as to what this came from. I believe that there were maybe some Margis from both of the administrations that weren't satisfied with how they were doing it, so they split off, or they weren't really with them, and then finally they decided to get together and create their own organization. And I'm not exactly sure if this one is as organized as the other two. I don't even know if it has a governing body, but they do send a lot of emails out calling for unity and stuff like that, and they want to do things their own way as well. And more organizations and defections have followed. I mean, once it's kind of like the cat was let out of the bag. Once one person is allowed to defect and do whatever they want, then everyone else sort of wants to do the same thing. They say, well, if you can decide how the organization should go, then I want it to go a different way. And so it sort of skyrocketed. It exploded. For example, the NYS, which stands for New York Sector, which is where most of the North American section of Ananda Marga is run out of New York. That sector has always had problems with being controlled by India. I think they always felt that Indian Margis felt superior to non-Indian Margis because that's where it came from, or they felt that they weren't, like, New York sector felt like they didn't have their interests at heart, that they were only concerned about their own country, or things like that, or maybe they just felt resentful because Baba started there. In any case, there had always been tensions between those two. And after the organization split, New York sector eventually also sort of declared its independence from the Indian administration and said, we want to govern ourselves, you guys are too messed up to do it. And I think now they're sort of allied with Third Front, but it's really confusing in any case. And the whole point is that it's all split. It's all messed up. And now there are many different organizations, and depending on who you talk to, there are 7 or there are 8 or there are 5. Overall there are a lot. And here are some examples. So there's Ranchi, which is the original organization. There's Kolkata, which is the Bengali. Then Unity or Third Front or EC, which is what I talked about. Then there are the Didis under Didi Ananda Gita, and Didi is what you call the female acharyas. As a respectful term, it means, I think, sister. And there's a section of Ananda Marga that is, I'll talk about it later, I think it's called the Women Welfare Department, which is supposed to be run by women and mostly for the upliftment of women's rights and emancipation, and it's supposed to be like by women for women, essentially. And in Kolkata, that organization is still together with the main organization. But for the Ranchi, the original administration, this organization, or the leader of this organization, Didi Ananda Gita, finally decided that she didn't want to have anything to do with them either, so she split. So actually the original administration doesn't have their Women's Welfare Department sector anymore. It's now separate under Didi Ananda Gita. So there's another split. And then as I said, the Dadas and Didis overseas don't really listen to anybody. And then also, like, the organizational system in Ananda Marga is almost entirely run by the sannyasins. That's what Baba did, is he transferred most of the power to the sannyasins. So this whole split is within the sannyasin part of the organization. The family acharyas and the regular margis are caught up in it because it's where they get all their leadership from, but it's not actually their split. The split is within the sannyasins. So then you have a split between the sannyasin organization, kind of, and the regular margis who just want to do work and, like, be spiritual. And etc. And then some people say that the overseas margis are split from the Indian margis. Then there's something called, there's a guy named Goenka, and he has the Indian National Committee. I don't even know what that is, but somebody said that's another split. Many court cases have been filed since the split, mostly between Ranchi and Kolkata. They dispute the leadership of the organization. They say that the current eldest, the current PP is not legitimate, or that he is legitimate. They dispute the ownership of land, that, like, Kolkata says this is ours, Ranchi says this is ours, and many other things. There are several different court cases going on. They've been in litigation for years. And actually a lot of people are saying that, like, Ananda Marga, the reason Ananda Marga is not really going anywhere anymore is because most of the money given to the organization is now being used for these court cases. Not really to spread the organization or to do good works for other people, but for litigation. And actually, a lot of people are really mad that, like, Ranchi especially, and I think Kolkata also, has started selling some of their land and some of their assets in order to, like, fund these things. And that's something that, they kind of feel like, well, what's the point? But we spent all this time and effort making this land and getting it. Now you're just getting rid of it to fund your court cases. There's a lot of resentment about that also. In the meantime, so what is left of the organization now, as far as I can tell, is just there are a lot of margis all over the world that are sincere, and they want to do good work, and they start their own projects in individual areas, but there is no centralized structure, So you find, like, the margis in one place doing, like, a school, the margis in another place doing, in Haiti, they had some of Amert in Haiti doing this and doing that. New York sector is doing their own thing. Each of them has doing a little bit of good, and there are some good and sincere margis in all levels of the organization. As always, they're always good and bad, but there is no centralized structure, and we all know that without support and a centralized structure, really their effectiveness is diminished extraordinarily. They can do much, much less and very little, really, without any center. And as I said, most of the money is going into legal battles and corruptions, it seems. And, like, one of the things that Baba always said was that the sannyasins have to be supported by the margis, or the acharyas have to be supported by the margis so that they can do more work for the organization. And that also sounds like that's not happening in most of the world. That the margis, the acharyas, including the sannyasins, have to sort of find their own means of financial support, or just live a very almost like inhumane life, because there's just no money. You know, there's no money, there's no support, it's too fragmented. So everyone's hands are tied. That's why Ananda Marga sort of fallen out of the public sphere. We barely hear about it anymore, even much less than we did before. It's because the amount that's being done has decreased drastically because of these things. Okay, so before I get into the overall overview, I want to ask if there are any questions about this part of the history leading up to this point. It was not as easy for me to get as specific information about this section. Like, I think in 2008 their first PP died and they elected another one, and of course Ranchi did and Kokka didn't like that, and et cetera, et cetera. But the general gist of it I think is true, and that's the important part. Any questions?
No questions, but this is just fascinating. This is just so interesting.
Okay. So overall, in one of Baba's discourses or lectures or books, I don't remember exactly where, but it's quoted that he said that the unity of Ananda Marga should not be allowed to be jeopardized for any reason. Unity should be maintained even at the risk of your life. And the question is, what went wrong? Because obviously that has not happened. And most of it we already went over, but I just want to repeat quickly the biggest points, that the tension between the Bengalis and Hindis exploded, and also between the Indians and the overseas, and between the family acharyas and the sannyasins, as I talked about. That was around even in the 1960s when Baba first created the organization, the sannyasin section. Between the acharyas and the sannyasins and the regular margis. Like, can you imagine if you don't know anything about Ananda Marga and you try to join right now? Like, you meet an acharya and you become inspired because Baba's teachings are so beautiful, and then, like, the acharya tells you that, well, you know, there's another organization called Kolkata, but they're bad, they don't know what they're doing. You should only follow Ranchi. And of course the margi doesn't know anything about this history, so they say, okay, I guess he must be right, he's my acharya. And so they say, you know, oh, if you're from Kolkata, you must be no good. And I'm sure that the Kolkata acharyas are doing the same thing there. And so, again, the split is being passed down to the margis through that. Or maybe there are other acharyas that say they just don't talk about it, you know, or say that, well, we're all margis, you know. So, like, the margis are confused like crazy, you know. I mean, especially the ones that were not around during this time. If you could just imagine entering an organization in this state of disarray, and all you know is that Baba had beautiful teachings, and, like, it'd be pretty complicated. But so then another big point is that, again, we can see that now that Baba is gone and all this has happened, dogmas are definitely beginning to form in the organization. And I want to read something. Let me wait a moment to see if maybe Maitreya is having a little trouble. Give me just one moment. Okay, it sounds like Maitreya is having a little computer trouble, but he said go ahead, and he'll join us again in a moment. So, in any case, so as I was saying, the dogmas are beginning to form. Definitely, it's very clear that for example, one of the dogmas that has always been around in the organization really is that Baba is God, you know, like without any question. And it's sort of the whole thing Maitreya talks about of a, what do you call it? A God complex, I guess you can say, or where they put you on a pedestal. They say, oh, you are God, and since you're on a pedestal, we can do whatever we want, kind of. Sort of that's happening. And they're also very clearly twisting Baba's words to support their agendas. They'll quote one part of the teachings with no regard for what the rest of it says, or well, I'll read you an example, but I want Maitreya to hear it too, honestly. So because I think he'll find it very interesting. So I'm gonna wait on that. I'll come back to it. And another thing is that now that the organization is split, again, the whole reason the organization split is because they weren't sure of what Baba wants. And because of that, now that it is split, everyone is basically proposing their own ideas of how to fix it. There is no unified understanding of what the best way is to solve the problem now. So some people say that we should all just forget about the past and start working together again. And other people are saying that, no, like Ranchi was the one that messed everything up. They have to atone for it first, and they're in talks. It's like Israel and Palestine almost, if that makes any sense. Like they keep getting together for talks. It's always like, oh, when's the next meeting? Oh, they're getting together for talks, but nothing actually happens. And then in the meantime, all these people are writing emails back and forth, or writing essays on how to fix the organization, what should be done. This is terrible. But of course, nothing really happens because the whole problem is not resolved. The base of the problem is not resolved. And most of the Margis overall are just flabbergasted as to how this could have happened, because they were so like Baba was from God, it was God, it was always God, like Parama Purusa, or God was on their side, and they had no doubt about that, they had no question. And so how could have this happened if God was with them? And so they're falling into two camps, kind of, where either they just don't understand, or they have they're like, oh, we must have messed it up, we really messed it up. Or some others are saying, well, this must be God's will, if God is with us, no question. And since we are messed up like this, that must be what God is doing. So some of them are like, don't worry, Baba's got everything under control. I'm sure this is just something that has to happen, or that it's God's will, so I'm sure it'll work itself out. Don't have to be worried. Both of the next things I want to do, I want Maitreya to hear. I think you would find it very interesting. So I'm going to pause here until he can get his computer going again. Does anyone have any questions?
Is Kyosha's sound also not working? Oh, there's my chitty.
I think.
Oh, good sound, Kyosha.
Well, I had it off because I have some background noise. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but maybe I don't. I don't know. So, we'll see.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good here to me. And there's my chitty.
Hello, Maitreya. Can you hear us? Okay, thanks, God. I held off on a few things because I thought you would find them interesting, so I'm going to go ahead now. Okay, I understand. But as long... okay, thanks, God. At least you can hear me. So I'll keep going. I was going to say that... Right, so we were talking about how dogmas are beginning to form in the organization, and I was going to read this, and I wanted to wait. So this is an email from one of their email lists, and I want to, this is just one person. I'm not saying that this is how everybody in Ananda Marga is, but I think it's a great example of how dogmas can easily be formed and are being formed from a good teaching. And I'm going to read this. So here we go. Okay. This guy, this person is a very strong proponent of the Bengali leadership of the Kolkata administration. So this is what it says. He's answering another person who didn't like what he was saying. So this is the answer that he gave. Baba set the protocol. He made Bengalis as his central workers. Until Hindu-obsessed fanatics get over their obsession, let them keep cool and reform themselves. Let them also ponder deeply why, for what reason, Baba made all central workers as Bengalis. As Baba says, nothing is accidental. So let them just for once in their life think what could be the reason for his decision. Baba organized and ordained that ethnic group called Bengalis. That was organized by Supreme Entity. And now, after Supreme Entity has departed, these people want to question decision of Supreme Entity? So what exactly is the extent of their faith, then? Their devotion and, above all, their surrender to his will, his decisions on every single issue. He made the decision to spend maximum time in Bengal, give maximum discourses on Bengali language and culture, and compose 90% of Prabhat Samgeet, which are the songs that Baba made, in Bengali, and keep all central workers as Bengal, and keep General Secretary as Bengali, saying General Secretary should be Bengali. These decisions were not made by human beings, but by God himself. So Goenka and a few others want to question the decisions of God. And then I thought this was interesting that a few lines later he says, please show me a drop of evidence of ethnic Bengali obsession by any Bengali. But by the grace of God, Bengalis will grasp that they don't need all this integration. They need to stand tall and move towards leadership of the entire world. It has been ordained by Baba. So I hope you can see how, because all these things are technically true. Yes, Baba did all these things. But does it mean that Bengalis are a superior race? I doubt that Baba would have said that that's what he meant. Actually, I don't doubt it. I know that's not what Baba meant. Like, it's similar to, you know, after Maitreya dies, we say that all Iranians are superior, and that all New Mexicans are superior because he was born in Iran and he created the organization in New Mexico. And disregarding all the discourses and scriptures that Maitreya says, you know, all are one. Just because I'm from Iran does not mean that they're superior. Disregarding all of that, they'll quote these other things and use that to support their agenda. It's the same thing they're doing with Baba. Like, Baba spent so much time talking about how everyone is, you know, one with God and equal, and yet they're doing this. So it's very clear how dogmas can be created. I think that's a great example of even 10, 15 years after this is happening. Okay, and finally, as an overall overview and a little bit of a lighter side after all this darkness, I want to read a little joke that pretty much sums it up. This is called One Wish. A Margi was doing sadhana on a California beach and was in deepest nirvikalpa trance. Suddenly a voice came from within him and said, because you have tried very hard to be faithful to me in all ways, I will grant you one wish. The man internally said, build a bridge to Hawaii so I can drive over any time I want. The internal voice said, your request is very materialistic. Think of the enormous challenges for that kind of undertaking. The supports required to reach the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The concrete and steel it would take. It will nearly exhaust several natural resources. I can do it, but it is hard for me to justify your desire for worldly things. Take a little more time and think of something that would honor and glorify me. The man thought about it for a long time. Finally he said, Lord, I wish that I could understand the Ananda Marga organization. I want to know how it works from the inside, what the leaders are thinking, why administrators sometimes make illogical decisions, what acharyas mean when they say nothing's wrong, and how I can make Baba's mission truly happy. The Lord replied, do you want 2 lanes or 4 on that bridge?
Oh, that's funny. That was on the chat room that you were...
That was on, if you look up, there's like a wiki, like Wikipedia. A wiki stands for a website where anyone can edit and add things. And so Ananda Marga has a wiki for themselves. It's called the AM Way Wiki. And I found this joke there.
That's so funny.
Alrighty, so I think everyone has a pretty clear picture of where Ananda Marga is now. Yes? We'll now move on to the second section, unless anyone has any questions. And the second section is, what does this all mean, and what lessons can we learn from it? So, consider right now that you're in Ananda Marga and all you know is Baba's teaching. Like, is there any way you could understand how this could have happened? You know what I mean? Like Baba is the guru from God, and he brought truth from God, and he created this amazing organization that seems so powerful, and in the course of 20 years, it's all fallen apart. How could this have happened, right? That's why they can't understand it, and that's why they're paralyzed. But we have a different perspective, because we know that, in fact, yes, Baba had great truth, and he brought an amazing organization, but he was never supposed to be the last, and his was not complete. And because we can see it in this way, we can understand it where Margis cannot. Like, we have to understand what is God's will and plan, not why is Ananda Marga specifically failing, or why is Islam specifically failing, or Christianity, etc., but what is God's will and plan overall. And when we look at God's will and plan overall, we can definitely see that there in fact is a reason behind all this happening, and that it actually makes perfect sense that it has fallen apart so quickly. And So let's look at some reasons why it might have fallen apart. And the first one is the question, did the Spirit of God leave Ananda Marga and Baba after Maitreya left? And this is something Maitreya has said several times. I'm going to read two small things. This first one is from a satsang. You can say that probably Baba was also a forerunner for this mission. Well, why don't I just go ahead and answer the question? That is one analogy. Actually, it was after I joined Ananda Marga that Ananda Marga started going down. Sounds like it was finished. The spirit was no longer in it. They started having a lot of trouble. Baba was thrown into prison. He stopped preaching and eventually completely isolated himself from everyone. You can see the Spirit of God moved from Ananda Marga to the mission. Therefore, Baba was a major manifestation in the sense of mystical paths and the Far East part of the revelation for the mission. And the second thing is from how he became Maitreya. This is right after he was given the name Maitreya. However, he was becoming a little disillusioned with the way things were being run there and the way things were handled. He found a deviation from what the ideology of his guru was and the way it was handled. Also, there were rumors starting in the organization about a whole lot of things, so he was getting kind of not as good a feeling as he used to have about the whole thing. Just a lot of things started to go wrong. He was feeling a little disconnected. Sounds like after his name was established to be Maitreya, his relationship with Ananda Marga started to crumble. And this goes back to what we were talking about in the last lecture, which is that actually it kind of seems like the Spirit of God might have started leaving even before Maitreya joined. Because, again, when I was looking through the history, it seemed most logical to split it right around 1971, because everything was going pretty well. A few bad things start happening, and then suddenly in 1971, Baba is imprisoned, his wife leaves, and all sorts of bad things start happening at that point. Like they're banned in India, they start being listed as a terrorist organization, etc. And again, I would propose that maybe God had felt that it had already reached the necessary point for it to get to Maitreya, which is what was important, and that he had withdrawn the grace, or started withdrawing the grace already at that point, which is why the problems were happening. Like, this seems logical based on what was happening. Why would it suddenly go crazy all of a sudden right before Maitreya joins? And let's see. Also, it's not just Maitreya that says that there were problems in the organization. Many of the people on the email list were saying that most of the disagreements and problems that are such a big deal now and have caused the split were around even during Baba's time. It was just that nobody really had the courage to say anything or do anything like bad when Baba was around. They were devotional to Baba, or they were afraid of Baba's wrath or something like that. So they kept it under wraps, I guess you could say, or they didn't let it get as out of hand as it has now, because like the family acharyas and the sannyasins always had tensions from the very beginning, and the Indian Margis and the non-Indian Margis always had tensions from the very beginning. That's funny. Fair enough, Maitreya. I'm sure that hopefully after this lecture is done, I think everyone will understand the importance of why, if there is something wrong, or if we have ego at this point, we have to get rid of it. It's not like it'll cause like major problems later. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if there's something wrong, tell Maitreya. And hopefully we can stop this from happening. But in any case, and other things that, the Bengali, the Hindi and Bengali shift, all of these things were already around in the organization, but they exploded after Baba left. And another thing that we can look at is that anything that Baba taught after Maitreya left is not included in the Sixth Seal, like not emphasized. Like, yes, Neohumanism is kind of related to Universalism, and yes, Microvita might be true, but like Maitreya had never even heard about these things until we did this research, or until people started bringing stuff that Baba brought afterwards. And so, I mean, that's pretty clear that it's not part of, like, at least not a major part of the Eternal Divine Path, or of God's, like, the essence of God's plan. So, I mean, again, if these things were important, if the Spirit of God was with Baba and Ananda Marga at this time, it really seems like we should know about them. But we didn't until later. So, I mean, I'm sure Baba, like, if you read the book Neohumanism, it doesn't have the same spirit as this other stuff. It's very intellectual. It's almost like a little New Ager in the way that it talks about it. It goes too far. It's sort of strange in a case. And like maybe, Baba still knew the base of the teaching. He knew that Universalism was good, but the Spirit of God was not behind him to really make it a powerful book. You know what I mean? And the Margis would kill me for saying that, but it's kind of true. And so again, it's just another sign that probably God had moved on at that point. And of course, finally, the split is a great sign that God is no longer with them. Like this is the reason the Margis are so confused, because it is a sign that God is not with them, and they could not understand why God is not with them. Like, why did Baba leave without giving instructions for a successor? I read that passage. He had time, you know. I mean, he spent the last year, like months of his life, doing amazing amounts of work, working like crazy. It's not like he was incapacitated. It's not like he had gone. You know, he had the ability to give very specific instructions for his successor. There's no reason he couldn't have. And he was always very thorough in all parts of the organization, generally, except for this. And suddenly, over the last period of his time, you know, it says in that quote that he spent a couple minutes reviewing and making sure that he had done everything necessary. Of course, that's just the that's just the general secretary thought that's what he was doing. But I mean, why didn't he? It just doesn't make sense. Like, if Baba had meant the organization to last forever, why wouldn't he have left away? So that's another great sign. And again, it can be assumed that if God was with them, they wouldn't have so many problems. Like, the moment that God leaves is when all these things suddenly appear and become much worse. And it is becoming, or has become, another dead religion. It's just like the others in Revelation. They're dead bodies, you know, holding on to their dead bodies. It's not, the organization is fragmented, it's fractured, and there are Margis that still, like, they can't give it up, but it's gone. Like, once it's broken that badly, it's impossible to put back together. And I would also theorize that perhaps, you know, after the Spirit of God left, it was only held together by the strength of Baba and his personality. He was a very strong person, obviously, and they had so much devotion towards him that they just focused entirely on him, and so it stayed together. But after he was gone, there was no focus, and God was not there anymore, and so therefore it went awry. So why did the organization split? And of course, the first thing is that what we just talked about, that the Spirit of God left. But also there are some more not logical, but just like more like mundane reasons that you can see as to why the organization was not as strong. And the first one is that the way the organization grew, and it's just the way that Baba did things. Like it was never, like, Ananda Marga was one big umbrella term referring to many different organizations and sectors and like schools and this and that and this and that, and all of them reported to like different parts, which eventually reported to Baba. Baba was the one thing that was unifying all of them. But really, the way that he made the organization, it's so fragmented, and I'll give you a few examples. That, all right, they split the world into 9 different sectors, so as to administrate the affairs of Ananda Marga in different places, and each one has their own organizational base. And then, as of 1990, I'm going to go here really quickly and show you this, that in the General Ananda Marga organization, there are 18 departments, collectively called General. And here they are: Commerce, Construction, Dharma Prakar, which means spreading the organization, Farm, Finance, Food and Care, Industry, ISMA, I don't even know what that is, Jagrati, Land, Master Unit, Press and Printing, Publication, Public Relations, Renaissance Universal, Society Building, Social Security, Women's Welfare. That's women's welfare is what I was talking about. That's specifically by women for women. And then you also have something called ERAWS, which stands for Education, Relief, and Welfare Section. And that's composed of 5 different subsections: medical, prevention of cruelty to animals and plants, education, relief, which is mostly Amrit and Amritel, and tribal people's welfare. And then what else do you have? We have you know, the separation of the sannyasi organization from the Margi affairs. The sannyasins have their own way of doing things, and the Margis are not allowed to get involved in their affairs. Even Baba made that very clear, that if the sannyasin organization has a problem, they fix it. And, you know, they give their initiations in secret, and different sannyasins have different levels of initiation that they're only allowed to give to certain people. And it's just like there is a separation. It's the way Baba made it. It's separate. And then, like, you know, in 1990, the year that Baba leaves his body, he creates an entire new thing called Ananda Marga Gurukula, which is supposed to be like, supposed to end up becoming the new school system for the world. And he puts, you know, Satish in charge. And just, can you see what I'm getting at here? Like, it's amazing how fragmented it is, how fragmented it was created. And when Baba's gone, like, without a central organization, all of these people are left to their own. Like, you know, it's just without a central organization, an organization that's created in this way is amazingly split, amazingly fragmented, and it's just, yes, exactly, Kyosha, exactly. Exactly. Almost, she says, almost like he set it up just to fall apart. It's just, it doesn't, it's not a strong way to do something, to create so many different things without, yes, yes, of course. Maitreya says God did. It makes sense. I mean, why else would this be this way? There has to be a reason. The third reason why the organization split is, again, there was a lack of a complete plan for the organizational structure and how to proceed after Baba's death. They didn't have the plan, you know what I mean? Like, the most they had was Charya Charya, and as we discussed, Charya Charya is not complete. And Baba himself didn't explain what they should do, so they had to go to Charya Charya. Charya Charya doesn't give all the reasons or all the everything that they need, and so then it causes problems. And without a complete plan, they have to make their own decisions. And if God is not with them, they make the wrong decisions, etc. Next is corruption of the head. As Maitreya said many times, if the head is sick, the body is sick. And it's mostly the head that fell apart. And I mean, once the head fell apart, again, everything else cascaded down. And we talked about most of this already, that there was no plan. There were a lot of disagreements of how to run things, especially when Baba was not clear. There's a lot of creation of dogmas, not truly letting go of attachments to the Bengali or the, etc. And for many, really, again, we talked about this before, but like the unifying force in Ananda Marga seemed to be Baba himself, like the devotion to the Guru. It wasn't about the teachings, like that they would be devoted to the Guru and do their sadhana or their meditation, and then later they would learn about the philosophy, and probably a lot of them don't understand it fully, or that was never really it for a lot of people. Like for some, yes, but for a lot, no. And so when Baba's gone, like they don't have anything left. That's why Maitreya emphasizes the teaching so much, because if you focus so much on the person will go away. He will not be there forever, and that's going to cause problems. So I think that pretty much sums up the essence of why the organization went down. At least all the reasons I could think of. Of course, the main one is that God was no longer with them, of course. So now we have all of this, right? All of this information as to why Ananda Marga went down. And that's the only reason that's really important, is so we can take that as a lesson and make sure it doesn't happen to us. Like, we have to make sure this does not happen to the mission. And what are these lessons that we can learn from this? How do we make sure that the mission is going to be different? And there are a couple reasons. First, we have to have faith that God really is with us this time. That as Maitreya has said many times, that all the religions before this were not complete, and God had a plan for them to become dead religions at this point. It's always been different than now. This is different in that most essential sense, that God really will not leave this time, and He will be with us, and the kingdom will come through the eternal divine path. This has been prophesied, so it will happen. And therefore, that is the most important point, I think. But of course, we also know that you cannot just be escapist and say, well, God said it's going to happen, so it's going to happen. We have to use our resources and our abilities to make sure that that is true. And so that's what the rest of these points are about. So the next thing that we can do is make sure to focus on the teachings instead of the prophet. Of course, we have to give the highest respect to Maitreya and focus that he is the channel that will bring us to God. But if we end up becoming like it was for Baba, where they say Baba is God, focus on him, pure devotion, don't know the teachings, then it's going to fall apart when Maitreya leaves his body. And we have to focus on the teachings, as Maitreya has said. That is the reason we are here. If you're not here because of the teachings and because you see that they are the truth, then you're not truly with the mission yet. And once you understand the teachings and truly see the vision, then you can never leave, like Radha said. So, yes, at least the leaders, that's right, because the head is the most important part. I mean, we can't govern or regulate everybody. Like, some people are going to join for not the right reasons. They might leave again. Maybe they don't understand the teachings fully. Maybe they'll create some dogmas and stuff. That's inevitable. We have to be aware of that. But the center, the organizational head has to be strong, because at least then there's a base that everyone can go back to. If that breaks, then there's nothing left. So yes, that's absolutely true, especially at the top. Especially at the top. Those that are at the center of the organization cannot allow that to happen to them. It will be amazingly destructive. The third thing that we have different from Ananda Marga is that we do have a very thorough and complete plan of both what will happen after Maitreya is gone specifically, and also the general organizational structure for the future. Like, we know exactly what we're going to do. And Maitreya says, and no one is higher than anyone else. It is who is the best for the job. It's just like we talk about in the categories, that it's not just the categories, the whole of the message, that the dharmas are different, but spiritually we are equal. It should never be lording one over another. It's not that it's not that the leader is better than the follower. It's just that he has a different dharma to accomplish. Both are equal in spiritual progress. And Maitreya says Iranians are not the best. So he said it right there. So don't anybody start talking about Iran, please, after Maitreya leaves, or about New Mexico. So anyway, going back to this, we know exactly what's going to happen after Maitreya leaves. Like he set up that there will be a round table, and that we're going to look for Maitreya's second incarnation. He set up how the round table is created. All of these things, like, you can find it on the website if you're not familiar with it, which I think everyone here is. But it's very specific. It's very thorough. We know exactly what's going to happen after Maitreya leaves his body. There will be no scrambling to discover what we should do. We know what we should do. And also, we know almost down to the like much more detailed than Baba what the organizational structure for the world government is going to be. It's like we were talking about yesterday. Baba talked about Prout. He talked about everyone should have resources and the minimum standards of life, and all of this should happen. These are the ideals. And he also talked about how, commerce should go back more to the community level, and the people should be empowered, and there should be no oppression and stuff, and all of these things. But does he give it really a way to do this? Not really. Not really. Not in the way that the plan is given. And it's not like Charya where parts are conflicting with each other. You can go through the whole plan. There's nothing conflicting. It makes perfect sense, And we don't have to, after Maitreya is dead 5 years later, go through all the different versions in different languages and try to figure out which one is the right one and how to resolve these problems. It's there. It was written by Maitreya in one setting. There is no doubt. You know what I mean? It's obviously created differently, and so that will also allow us to make sure we don't start creating disagreements. Another thing that I think is very important is the way that the mission has started, the thief of the night, the whole concept that in one way we hate so much because it seems like the mission is not going anywhere, but in another sense I think that it's actually one of the reasons we're going to be able to stay together, because unlike Baba, where in the course of 50 years the organization turns from one person to thousands and hundreds of thousands, and he over the course of a lifetime has to suddenly deal with all that, we have an entire lifetime here to do nothing but build the base very strong, make sure the teachings are perfect, and absolutely cover everything, cover all the bases. If anything is not covered, then we can realize that and get a handle on it. We can make sure that the center of the organization is completely strong and totally ready to deal with an expansion. We can make sure everything is done the correct way. This is the only revelation where this has happened. Like Muhammad, his teaching exploded, and over the course of his lifetime he conquered an entire city and had a kingdom. And Christ only had 3 years. Like, what was he supposed to do, etc. Baba and Baha'u'llah were in prison for most of their lives, and it's just different. Like it's completely different. And as Maitreya said, all questions are answered. It's completely different, and it gives us the ability to make sure that we're doing it right this time. That there's no doubt as to what should happen. There is no way that we can allow it to break up. And also, we have the promise from God that Maitreya will return twice more. To make as the like Maitreya, I mean, God, it's kind of like God has spread the organization out over 3 lifetimes instead of 1, so that it doesn't become too big too fast and get messed up. That this way we have the ability. Maitreya says, if there are any questions left, ask this afternoon. And yes, that is true. And also on Monday, these last 2 sessions, use them. They're pretty rare and important. But in any case, we also have the promise that Maitreya will return twice more. So it's not like after Maitreya is gone, we have to deal with it ourselves and maybe do something wrong. Our goal and our mission after Maitreya leaves his body is to be stewards and hold it and make sure it doesn't get messed up. And then when Maitreya comes back, he takes over again, and we can be sure that it's once again under the command of God. And we also have the promise that the scepter shall be no longer left to the hands of humans. You know, the eldest will always be called Maitreya and will always be connected to God. And if not, he'll be impeached. that's part of the plan. But I'm going to read this. This is from the essay in supplements about the scepter. And it says, in Daniel 2:44, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Since we believe this kingdom will be established after the seventh angel comes, at the end time, after this seventh angel, it will not be left to other people. This seems to be clearly saying that the scepter will no longer pass to anyone. It will stay with the Christ, or with Christ, the first begotten Son, and God. Christ and God will reign forever. This is also shown in the Revelation. Revelation 11:15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And that's not been done in any other religion. Always after the religion, after the prophet leaves, those around him have to take over leadership, and that causes problems. This is not true anymore. So I think that's very important. And finally, I think everyone knows this sort of, but it's worth reemphasizing that we have to put the purity of the original teachings and the unity and purity of the organization as the very highest priority. Don't forget what it says in Tho. All are lessons to learn, not to argue, but to rejoice. If arguments or disagreements occur in the organization, we all have to stop, go back to Tho and the teachings, and agree again, because they're there, and we must not allow that to be broken. And every precaution has been in place in this to make sure that it does not happen. That it's all written down by Maitreya's hand, edited, put it on the website. This is the only revelation where everything has been done this way. All the questions are answered. Maitreya says those who have ego and want to lead this mission should be ignored. And we have to be strong. You know, it's not. And also, let's see. Yeah, so because of all this, there's less room for interpretation and misuse. There's more unity. And also, Maitreya has said that if something does go wrong, there will be other, or there could be other minor manifestations or avatars or minor prophets that will come to Earth to give lessons to us and steer the kingdom right again. So again, all the precautions and options possible are in place to make sure that this one starts right and goes right and stays forever, or at least for 1,000 years. And so all of these things have to be taken into account. We have to realize that God is with us and that He's done everything possible, and also we have to do everything possible, do His will to the fullest, and make sure that it never happens the same way in this case. A few final thoughts. As I've said before, the Ananda Margis are extremely attached to Baba. Like, even with this destruction of the organization, and they're realizing that he did not provide everything, very few of them are able to break away from the pure devotion to Baba, or the attachment they have to him as their guru. And like I said, they are now elevating him to the status of a god, or of God, like absolutely God in flesh, similar to Christ. And that they have so many of these magical stories about him, about how he knows everything. And, you know, they have a story that actually, like, he got mad at Stalin, and so in the middle of his discourse, he said, "Stalin, die," and he cut his hand, and then Stalin died. And stuff like this. You know, it's amazing, the stories they have. But it elevates him to the point that they cannot let him go. So probably a lot of these Margis we're not going to be able to bring to the mission, or well, not that we're not going to be able to bring them, but they're not going to come to the mission in this lifetime. However, Baba probably accelerated the spiritual progress of these people amazingly. Like, his teachings were amazing. His spiritual practice were amazing. He made them meditate twice a day as their whole lives, or they were supposed to, and do yoga and all these things. So I'm sure that these people had their spiritual progress accelerated greatly. And maybe when these people are reincarnated, they'll have this spiritual progress, but they won't have the attachment to Baba. And so maybe a lot of these people are going to become the elects in their next lifetime and really help the mission get going. So we can also see that that was very helpful. And overall for Ananda Marga, I think we need to again remember that we should focus on the parts that are in the mission, the parts that are the sixth seal. These are the most important parts. They have been shown by God to be the most important parts. And the rest can be useful. Like probably Baba's songs are very beautiful. I've never heard them, but I mean, I'm sure they're very nice. He composed 5,000 of them. Maybe only some of them are nice, but you compose 5,000, at least one of them has to be nice. But anyway, we can use those. That's great. But they're not nearly as important, and they should never be emphasized or focused on. And they're theories, not revelations. Things like Microvita, they're theories. We have to prove them. What's important is that he brought the concept of Paraviparas and the concept of the cyclical movements, and he purified the Hindu religion and introduced Maitreya to the mystical paths. And now we can see that once that mission was fulfilled, the organization fell apart. And it's very clear that it was never meant to be anything more than that. That was what it was meant to do, and it has been done. And I think we also have to remember that even with all these precautions, even with all the things I talked about, why the mission is not going to end up where Ananda Marga is, we still have to remember that God prophesied that the mission will fall apart eventually, that even this first kingdom of heaven after 1,000 years or a long time will not last forever. So we can see that the ego of the human is very tenacious, and even with all these precautions, they will eventually manage to break it again. And but we can have faith that it will last for a very long time. Yes, that's true, Kyoshi. It says it'll only fall for a short time, and then and Maitreya will return, actually, and purify it again, and then it will last for much longer, I believe. Or it will not fall again. So, yeah, I don't want to be depressing in this lecture. Like the kingdom is going to come. God prophesied it. The mission will not. It's not going to break the same way. Like it's going to be amazing. We are at the cusp of an amazing change in human life. It's going to be incredible, and it's not going to the world is going to be unrecognizable in 100, 200 years to how it is now. It's going to be amazing. It's just going to be amazing, and we should look forward to that. Absolutely, and we should be happy and glad and thanks God with all of our hearts that it's going to happen. But we also have to remember that this is what's happened to every other religious organization throughout the history. And why does God give us history? He gives it as a lesson so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. And so that the point of this lecture is to show you that these are the mistakes that Ananda Marga made, and this is the result. They are broken. And we have to understand these mistakes and be sure that we do not repeat them. So that's pretty much everything I had to say. So thanks God, everyone. And and I'll open the floor now to any questions or discussion. If anyone wants to say anything else, or if they think I missed something, if they want to disagree with anything, or anything, please go ahead.
It was very interesting, Noor, and I thank you for the text because it was easier for me to follow.
Oh, thanks, God. Yeah, I know I speak kind of fast. It's always been a problem of mine, so I hope that helped. Thanks, God.
I just wanted to say I thought this was absolutely fascinating, and it seems we know very little about Buddha. Buddha was such a long time ago, but we do know, we hear stories that he died all by himself, and we know a little bit about some of the other people. We know Christ was crucified, and right after he died, like you said, the Christianity went in two different ways. There was a big fight between Paul and Peter about leadership, and we know that happened in the Muslim religion. We know the moment that Prophet Muhammad died, there was a big split, a big pull for power. We know what happened in the Baha'i faith, but we've never known it this concisely as what's happened in our current time with Ananda Marga. And you have all these facts and dates, and that's something that's missing in Buddha's time and in Christ's time, and that's fascinating. So maybe not only did the Sixth Seal give us the concept of paradeepras, but also it gave us this information that, again, confirms why our organization is so small. If anybody has any questions about why our organization is so small, that's it. That's absolutely it. Yeah. Because if it was wide, like you said, if it was wide and huge and all over, there would be little power pockets all over when Maitreya did leave his body. And that's why. That's why. So thanks God, Noor. That was wonderful.
I think that the wisdom of that is going to make itself clear in ways that we don't even begin to understand eventually. Like maybe, when Maitreya returns, he's still going to be the Maitreya, but he's not going to be the one that revealed the 7 seals. Maybe that's going to help people not split off and create their own dogmas, because I don't know. It's just we have to see what's going to happen. But I trust in God that it was the best way to do it, and we can see some ways for sure that it is, because I think it's very clear that in all the other organizations, one of the reasons that it has such problems is because it expanded so fast.
It also gives those of us that have been with the mission a long time really a chance to truly, truly saturate with the teaching.
Yes.
I think that's real important, because my mind, when you were talking about all the problems that developed in Ananda Marga, was already going to, well, as the mission gets bigger, we're going to deal with this and what's going to happen. But then all of a sudden, I remember all our lessons to learn, and I remember eternal divine path, and, so anyone that's been with the mission for enough years will go back to those things. So that's awesome. It just makes so much sense again.
Yeah, I think Kiyoshi makes a good point that probably we are going to deal with a lot of these same problems. We will deal with racism. We will deal with people that want to create their own dogmas. We will deal with people that want to be leaders but have ego. And it's like Maitreya was talking about in the Sat song a couple days ago. I think, was it Friday? I think it was Friday. That we have to see the situation absolutely clearly. We have to become compassionate. And compassionate means to understand the situation clearly and do the best thing, not for like making someone happy, but the best thing for the person and the best thing for the organization and the best thing for God. And if someone is breaking the organization, it doesn't matter how nice of a person they are, they have to go. You know what I mean? That must be of the utmost importance. And if someone is doing ungodly things, they can't be in a high place in the organization, It's got to be, it has to be more important than anything else, more important than our desire to be liked or to be friendly with people, It might even be better to, I don't know, but we just have to keep that in mind, that especially when Maitreya leaves his body, it's not just us at stake anymore. It's not just like our own karma. It's the organization of God. So.
And even we have all these examples in history, and we even have examples in the history of the mission of situations like this.
Certainly.
Correct. I mean, like lately, I found myself examining myself just working with people to see, what are my motives? Are they really pure? I think we don't realize in our daily life we're so much a part of this society that we get caught up in these impure motives and think that's the way to be. And, thank God for this teaching. Otherwise, I wouldn't even think about that. I would just think that's the right way to be.
I one time read something where Maitreya said, those who are the Purvipras or the elects check their ego in every step and turn, and that's fascinating to me.
That makes sense. And even the elects have 1,000 years to become perfect, but this part has to be focused on, really, and this part of the ego has to be destroyed as fast as possible, I think.
When you say this part, you mean the part that is going to try to oppose the teachings or take over or have agendas?
Yeah, like any part that would affect the organization. We have to put the organization in front of ourselves. I don't know, like, it just, I just feel like, us as individuals can have our little imperfections and deal with those, but most importantly, we have to destroy any part that might have any chance of hurting the organization as a whole, because that's much more important than us as individuals.
Absolutely.
And Maitreya says, yes, keeping the mission together and not letting this happen to us, or letting this happen to it, is the most important.
And you might say that Maitreya's teaching is much more organized too, because it's on the website. It's clearly written in Tho. I mean, and you said that too in your lecture, Noor. It's so organized,
Yes,
so it
absolutely.
shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't. But we also have to remember that, I mean, as I read, Baba said very clearly, the unity of Ananda Marga should not be allowed to be jeopardized for any reason. Unity should be maintained even at the risk of your life. It can't be said clearer than that, and they still messed it up. So, yes, but we also have to be diligent.
Yes.
That's another thing I think, Mommy, you were talking about, that we, you know, this organization gives us, or because it's so close to us, that it gives us much more of a picture, a clearer picture than other religions.
Right.
Another thing it does for that is the creation of dogma. That, you know, that email I read to you guys, like,
Right.
it's very clear how dogma can be created. You know, you take a little bit of it, you
Right.
ignore the rest, and you use it to push an agenda. It's very clear. So.
But again, it's a matter of going back to the teachings, and it's all on the website. It's all there. It's not a book here and a book there and a writing here and a writing there, but it's all there.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And Ma says, but this time we know Maitreya will return, and maybe that will make the difference. Yeah, I think all these things are going to make the difference. All of these, it's an amazingly different situation this time in every way. So thanks God. Yeah, thanks God.
Thanks God. Yes, very interesting. Very.
So I mean, we're close to the end of our time. If anyone has any other comments to say, then please go ahead. Otherwise, I guess we can end it here and say, thanks God.
All right. Salam. Thanks, God, Noor.
Thanks God. So these notes will be up. You know, if you click on the lecture on the schedule and it goes to the outline, on that outline page, these notes will be added eventually, so you all can see them, etc. So that's it. Salam, everyone. Thanks for coming. And be sure to come to Maitreya's second and third events, question and answer sessions tonight and tomorrow night. And if you have any questions, ask them now and ask them there. And maybe if this lecture gave you some questions, ask them. And that's it. So, salam.
Salam.
Salom, thanks again.